Does it feel like every part of your life is divided? Every scenario, every environment, your church, your school, your work, your friends, left, right, conservative, liberal, religious, secular. It seems you always have to take a side. This is a conversation between a progressive Christian and a conservative atheist who happen to be great friends. Welcome to Living on Common Ground.
Do you think if we met today, we would still be friends?
I don't know, but we're friends now.
A mob is no less a mob because they're with you.
Man, so what? We won a few games. And y'all fools think that's something? Man, that ain't nothing, y'all. And you know what else? We ain't nothing either. Yeah, we came together in camp. Cool. But then we're right back here and the world tells us that they don't want us to be together. We fall apart like we ain't a damn bit of nothing, man.
This is a special episode. It's kind of like a supplement to the conversation that we had with Peter Rollins a few weeks ago. If you haven't listened to that episode, I would suggest that you might want to go back and check that one out first before listening to this one. But this is a short episode, and it was originally released as a video on Peter's Patreon page. If you're not following him or supporting him on Patreon, I would highly recommend you take the time to support his efforts on that platform. You can find a link in this episode's description. That being said, in this special episode, you're going to hear Peter discuss the differences between community and communion. He's also going to offer some questions or suggestions on how to create true communion. What he has to say raises actually a question for me, and it's something that I've been thinking about ever since our first conversation with him several weeks ago. The question is this: is the work that we're doing here at Living on Common Ground, is it actually about creating communion rather than community?
Thought I would do one of these morning reflections on why I'm so uneasy with the word community and what alternative there is to the building of community. And this allows me to get into some of the stuff that I even explored with ChatGPT earlier today. If you watch that, there was a point, maybe close to the end, when we started to discuss the difference between community and what I call communion. That's what I'd like to touch on briefly here, but probably with an emphasis on the practical and even an invitation for you to think about how you might set up a communion where you live. So anyway, let's start with that. It was interesting because I was listening to an interview with Todd McGowan recently, and he's talked about how he was always uncomfortable with the word community. And then he decided to, think more rigorously about that. And really one of the products of that is his book, which is about community, which is the one on alienation. Can't remember the title off the top of my head, but it is a great book. And so when I heard him say that, I was like, well, that's funny because I've been the same. I've always been uncomfortable with that term. And, increasingly, I've come to an awareness of, why that is and what a potential alternative to that is. So to talk briefly then about community, and then I'll reference actually the ChatGPT discussion, which you can go and find on my YouTube channel. Community can be defined as a social bond that is formed through something that is shared. Now, on a surface level, it's shared identity. It's shared beliefs, shared practices, shared values, but also at a deeper level, a shared enemy or a shared obstacle. So what kind of really binds a community together is either wanting to get rid of some group or having some sort of problem that they want to overcome. And so the community is bound together through a goal. And the goal is related to a problem that has to be solved. So there is what I was saying, a negativity, a lack that forms community. Something I won't get into in depth here, but I would say that lack is what all social bonds are formed around. I've heard people talk about trauma bonds, um, which is, I guess, where two people maybe have had a shared trauma and that kind of binds them together. In a sense, all bonds are social bonds. All social bonds are trauma bonds. In that, there is a certain lack that enables them to function. And in a community, that lack, as much as possible, is rendered into an obstacle. We're lacking something, there's something we want to achieve, and bind together in achieving that goal. And if the community achieves the goal, gets rid of the enemy, what can often happen is the community collapses, because what was holding the community together was precisely the obstacle. But I say shared beliefs, shared practices, shared values, shared obstacle, shared enemy. That's community, which means that community inherently has insiders and outsiders. Now, this is what I discussed with Chat, because ChatGPT kept, when it was pretending to be me, it said communities tend to be built around identity. They tend typically to have insiders and outsiders. And what I was saying to Chat is that I think it's more appropriate to say that community always has insiders and outsiders. It is always built on shared identities, obstacles, enemies. And that's an important distinction. It sounds like a very minor distinction whenever you say, well, to say a community is typically about insiders. But the problem with that is actually that's the very idea that sustains communities. And what I mean by that is whenever you have a community of insiders and outsiders, one of the things that sustains you is the fantasy that there is a community that has no outsiders. And that can allow you to try to, have a better community, to be open to more people, to always be changing. Nothing wrong with that. That's brilliant. And we're all in communities. Communities are part of life. But when you have a fantasy that community is only contingently about insiders and outsiders, in other words, that it is possible to have a community of all insiders, then that fantasy, as I say, both drives community, sustains it. And it means the closer you get to that ideal, it's not the fewer outsiders you get, but the more invisible the outsiders become. And so the ultimate outsider in a community is the one who is nobody and nothing, who is banished to hell, right there. So there's that old joke, the joke that, my girlfriend is never late for me, because if she was ever late for me, she would no longer be my girlfriend. It's where you've got a set of your partners or whatever. But if the person is outside the set, they are so outside, they're nothing. They're nobody, they're nothing. And that's kind of like how communities that try to be super inclusive end up simply having outsiders that, to them at least, are invisible. So when you see a community saying all are welcome, you can ask yourself, okay, who's not welcome, right? So then you go, well, is there an alternative to the community? And the first thing to say is, well, we have something in society called the commons. The commons is different because the commons are areas where people can mix who don't share the same identities, the same values, the same enemies and obstacles. So think of a park as an example. You go to a park is a commons. Nobody owns it. There's no insiders. You're not allowed to take over a park and say only such and such people are welcome here, right? A park is a commons. It is for everybody. And that's where you can rub shoulders with people who are very different from you, who, as I've said before, don't simply disagree with you, but disagree with you about what the disagreements are about or how to interpret the disagreements. That's what makes disagreements intractable. When you have two people arguing and they just have a disagreement about something, right, whether it's politics or whatever, then that can be resolved. They argue, they fight, because they just disagree on, say, how to interpret the facts, or they they haven't had access to what you think, right? And there's two people and they have disagreement. But in society, we disagree also on how to interpret the disagreement. So it's not just two people on two sides. There's a further twist. And that second twist is what makes a community, worldwide community, impossible, right? And so in a park or in a shopping mall or on a Greyhound bus or whatever it is, there are these places, diminishing, sadly, but these places where you can genuinely encounter people who would be offensive to you. And as I say, the commons, you could say, is under threat. And when the commons is under threat, then societies generally break down, because once you're only got communities and you don't have the commons, then you get factions, and then you get civil wars and all of that stuff, right? Now, and that's what Todd McGowan explores in his book on alienation. One is community, which is about having insiders, which generates outsiders. Then you have the commons, which is just outsiders, right? So in a way, there's nobody as an inside. Nobody owns the park. Nobody owns the space. That's what a true commons is. You can encounter anybody within legal kind of constraints, right? But then there's a third move. And the third move I want to call communion. And communion is a social bond where we all acknowledge that we are outsiders. And that's what makes us insiders. That's what connects us. We are connected precisely by all being outsiders, not fitting in. That there's something about being human. This is the inside of existentialism. You see it very beautifully in the work of Jean-Paul Sartre, in Being and Nothingness. But the idea that there is something about being human, which means that we don't fit. We don't even fit within our own ideology or our own minds, and we definitely don't fit in society. There's something about being human, which, as in the words of Albert Camus, makes us an outsider. And what makes communion different from community is that it is also forged on lack, on some impossibility, but it is not externalized on a scapegoat, on something outside. It is seen as within the group. One example of this might be in family therapy, where instead of thinking about if there's a problem in a family and say there's one child has issues with, say, anorexia or something like that, and kind of identifying that child has issues, within kind of models of family therapy, you see the family as a unit. And you see that you can't really address just the individual with the anorexia, but in a way you have to address the entire family system. The whole family system is implicated in some way with this symptomatic explosion. And in analysis, it's the same thing. Even though you're not necessarily talking to the family members, you're always exploring how the individual in front of you is woven into the desires of a wider system. And so in a communion, you acknowledge the lack within yourself. And the example I like to use is AA, which I think is a form of communion, because in AA, you're not going, the problem is outside, right? Is out there, right? The enemy is out there. You're going like, I'm the problem, right? And my situation and my world, like there's something about me and you have to acknowledge that, take responsibility for it. And that's kind of the beginning of the 12-step process within a community of grace. Community, I use the word, within a collective of grace. You are able to acknowledge your own lack, your own obstacles, your own implication in what you're experiencing, your symptom, and that allows you to get a purchase on it, and it transforms the way you relate to it. So communion is the type of social bond that comes out of Church of the Contradiction. So Church of the Contradiction is the liturgy where you go to a space, and through the art and the music and the spoken word and the ritual, you encounter that lack. You are able to symbolize it. You're able to experience it. You're able to live it. And then the social bond that comes out of that is communion, where you're able to be in a space with people who are radically different from you. Now, I don't think that happens in the world. Very briefly, I'll say that it's almost like, churches have their service and then they have their small groups. Well, communion is like the small groups. It's a space where maybe once a week you come together in a circle and you hear each other's experience of lack, of obstacle, and you see in your own struggles and in other people's struggles something that is shared, that you share that lack together. And I'm experimenting with that with something called the Death of God Supper Club. And there's various ways in which this can be done. But I'm inviting you as well to think with me about what that looks like and potentially experiment. I think largely it should be based on a model of maybe putting chairs in a circle and providing a space where people can say something like, my name is Peter and I am alienated. I am an outsider. And then you maybe all go around saying that once, if you want. Somebody can say silent if they're not ready to say that. And then after that, you just let whatever happens, happens. And the facilitator is there just to name what's going on and to, if things get stuck in like maybe two people talking, the facilitator can name that and say, oh, it's interesting. These two people are talking, other people are being silent. Can I ask people to reflect on that? And, just naming what's going on in the space to keep it moving. And the idea is not that you create something where you identify around shared religious, political, cultural beliefs, but where you see briefly in that, say, hour of time, you see that you're all creatures of desire, creatures of longing, creatures of yearning, creatures who suffer. I'd like to make another of these on the difference between suffering and pain. I maybe do the next one on that, so I won't go into it. Anyway, I hope that's of interest. We've talked about community, the commons, and communion. And the idea that community is based on shared identity, beliefs, values, obstacles, and enemies. The commons is a space of all outsiders where you can basically rub shoulders with anybody. And then communion, which is weirdly where people of radical difference, like the commons, can have a social bond, like community, but not based on particular identities, but in the universality of lack itself. All right. Thank you for your support on Patreon, by the way. This allows me to do this work. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Living on Common Ground. Please follow wherever you listen to your podcasts and share it with your friends. You can also find a link to our social in the description. The more people we have living on common ground, the better the world will be.